So maybe I should introduce myself. My name is Jeremy Friedman. I was a teacher. I am a teacher. I taught science for many years, 6, 7 years. First high school, then elementary, informal science. I've taught Jewish. I did teach one class at Ida Crown for a year, Chumash class, but other than that, I've been teaching. I taught here when I used to live in Lakeview. I used to teach some classes here before Rabbi Wolkenfeld's time, right? Yeah. And then I currently teach. The shul I go to is called Congregation Israel. I teach a weekday shir. I teach Shabbos. After the Shkama Minyan, I give a shir, and then I also to the kids. I give a shir, and then other than that, I've taught in a lot of different places. But before that, I guess I learned. Maybe I should give a background. I studied in a bunch of different places, including yeshiva that doesn't really exist too much anymore, at least certainly not in the same capacity, called Yeshiva Miftar. There's a place called Yeshiva Kotel. You guys have heard Yeshiva Kotel? It's a little bit more famous. It's in the old city. Then I was at this place in New York called Yeshiva Hadar. And then I went to this place in Israel called Yeshiva Male Gilboa. I was there for a full year. And then I was at the Pardes, in the Kollel Pardes. And then I just, on my own, try and study and keep up, at least to teach the classes I do. So that's my qualifications. So, yes. The topic here is understanding Hukim in terms of human experience, the red heifer and the laws of mourning. That's a large topic. Do you guys know what a chok is or a Hukim? We did this in honor of Parshat Mishpatim. Actually, it just fell out that way. But the Parsha, it has nothing to do with the Parsha. Do you guys know what a chok is or a Hukim? Good. All right. We'll start from the very beginning. Yeah? A law. It's a law. Okay, good. Anything else? No wrong answers right now. I'm a teacher. This is a
particular type of law that made an obvious, easy to understand.
Yeah.
Like moral or ethics.
Meaning it has no moral. You said it has no moral ethics.
It's not obvious.
It's not obvious. Okay. Okay. Good. Yes. I like that. Also, can I ask another question? I don't want to be too. What's your comfortable? Are you guys comfortable with me reading the Hebrew? Would you rather we stay in English? If I read the Hebrew, can you stay along with the English?
There's a range of Hebrew comfort in the room, so it's probably best to
do as much English as possible.
Or make sure you also do English at least.
Got it. Okay. Wonderful. I'll try and do that. Okay. Yeah. So. Traditionally, I think it's very, the definition of a chok as opposed to a mishpat would be, mishpat is also a rule, but might have the rules that are in this week's parsha are a little bit more obvious, at least ethically, where they're coming from, because they're talking about, people hurting each other or damaging each other, for instance, but there are other ones. But yeah, chok, like you said, remind me your name?
Shalom.
Shalom. Thank you, Shalom. Is that either there is no ethic, it's amoral. It's not. God just said do it, so you do it, or at least it's not obvious. It's right. It's not obvious what the ethic is. So for instance, they told me to be brief. I think the rabbi told me to be brief, and in honor of that, I made 6 pages of sources. But this first page, I'm going to mostly skip over. You can maybe, if you would like, on your own time to take a look, at least in the English, some arguments for certain rules. We're going to focus on the red heifer specifically, but there was another case in Leviticus where they talk about this goat that they would place their sins off of and send off into the desert and throw off the cliff, and it would die and break apart into pieces. And then that was also not evident to people that was ethically sound or obvious what the ethic behind that was, at least. And so there's some discussion in the Talmud about that. And Rashi, who's a famous commentary, 12th century commentary, 11th century commentary on very famous, brings sort of the language from that concerning the red heifer. But I'm going to skip this. Besides what I just mentioned, we're going to go to page 2. Because what I'd like to argue, which may be obvious from the title of the class, is that if we can look at the rules and the details behind the red heifer and look at them in their context, we can make some sense out of them. Maybe it's not obvious to us what the ethic is, but maybe there is an ethic, and try and look at what it is, and that'll be the first step, and then the second step will be, we're going to see if there's any, ironically, the sources on the first page are very critical of anyone who would think not to do what God said, even if it's not obvious to them why God said it. But ironically, the red heifer is something we don't do nowadays. So even though there's strong language about how we have to, we have to do these things, even though we don't know what they mean, maybe. So we're going to see, the first part is going to see, does it make sense in context? And the second part is going to be, is there any corollaries in modern practice or halacha, the Jewish law in modern times? And by modern times, I mean the last 2,000 years. Is that modern enough?
Yeah.
But the post-biblical. Okay. All right, so let's look at the passage which deals with this, which is in Numbers, and it's chapter 19. I think I'm going to read it in Hebrew and translate. God said to Moshe and Aaron, Zod chukad Torah, that's where they get the terminology. This is the rule of the Torah, of the teaching. But the chok is where people zoom in and zone. That's this is a special type of rule. Asher tzivad Adonai lemor, daber b'nei Yisrael v'ikhu elach hafara adumat mimah asher ein ba mum asher lo ala ala ol. So God commanded, speak to the children of Israel, take a red heifer, or red cow, pure tamimah, asher ein ba mum, that has no blemish, and that has not a yoke has not been placed on it. It's done no work. So at this point, it's special. It's been set aside for this special ritual. You should give it to Elazar, the Kohen, not to be confused with Eliezer, who's Moshe's son, who was the second high priest after his father Aaron. So they specifically left the camp, which is unusual for rituals. You have to this Kohen, it's got to be slaughtered in front of Elazar the Kohen. He takes some of the blood in his fingers. Even though he's outside the camp, he faces towards the Ol Moed, which is the tabernacle, and he flings the blood 7 times. Now, this is unusual, and I have not much to say about this. But I will say it is reminiscent of another ritual which occurred on Yom Kippur, when the high priest also sprinkled blood 7 times and as a forgiveness or purification ritual. So maybe I don't understand it, but it seems to be in the realm of purifying and or forgiveness. Okay, 5. Hey, so in front of Elazar they have to burn the cow. Ora, vet basara, vet dama, vet persha, yisrof. The whole thing. It's with the hide and all the meat and the blood and everything. It all gets burned. Okay. So it's interesting. All right, maybe I'll come back to this. So the Kohen takes a what's the type of branch? The erez.
Cedar wood.
Cedar, that's it. Hyssop, and then a scarlet wool, some red wool, and they throw it into the ash with the cow that's being burned whole. Okay, let's pause for a second here. Clearly, there's some symbolism here. The red scarlet. Also, there's part of that is related to another red thing that happens on Yom Kippur with the goat. But setting that aside for instance, I don't know the symbolism here, but I will say that I think, and I could be wrong about this, but with ashes may or may not have been used as surfactants, no, as cleansers, or no? Yes or no? Maybe. Okay. Sure. So these, I don't think these are just random clearly there's symbolism here, with the red, and it's got to be with no blemishes and completely red, and the red wool and these special branches that who knows what, if they thought they were healing branches or whatever, I don't know, but or they're, I don't know the significance, and I'm not going to speak to it, but maybe the ashes may have been thought of as a cleanser. In any case, we're going to see this is used for a cleansing ritual. Okay, 7. Zayin, Kibes begadav hakohen v'rachatz b'sorah b'mayim v'achar yavo al machaneh v'tevei ha'ktoren ha'arav. So the kohen who done the burning has to wash his body, and then he returns to the camp, and he is still ritually impure until that night, which is an interesting point. I'm going to come back to that. Okay, next. Chet, 8. V'asarei foto yechabes begadav b'mayim v'rachatz b'sorah. Sorry, I did that. Line. Sorry. Chet. V'asarei foto yechabes begadav b'mayim v'rachatz b'sorah b'mayim v'tamei ha'arav. Tet. V'asaf ish tahor et efer ha'parah v'niuch michutz l'machana b'makom tahor v'ayta adat la'adat b'nei Yisrael l'mishmeret l'mei nidach hatat hi. So, the one who gathers, so they have to get a pure person. A second person has to come in to gather up the ashes, and they put that outside the camp in a pure place, because these are now pure ashes, and it's for the congregation of Israel. It's a guarded. How do they translate this? It's a guarded thing. It's kept for Israel. It's a water for cleansing. It's for purification of sin. So we're going to see later it's mixed with water. Right now it's not mixed with, it's dry. But later it's going to be mixed with water, but it's going to be used for purifying. And 10. So also the second guy who came in and collected the ashes is now, who had to be pure when he came in, is now ritually impure until the night. And so then they use the ashes for the generations and for Jews and for the residents and for the ger. Okay, so the question, a big challenge to this whole ritual is that part one of which was brought up in the sources I skipped on page 1 is that the people who are pure, even though this is a purifying ashes, they're used in a purifying ritual, all the people involved become impure. But does it make sense to you guys why they become impure? Is there any reason why you think they would become impure? Yes. Is it a clean process?
Yeah.
I guess the analogy would be, even though soap is a cleanser, the production of soap is not necessarily a clean process.
That said, though, when a kohen is burning a carbon, right, it would be something like that.
Yeah.
He doesn't become pure.
Right.
Something specific. It's
Right. Right.
That's
a good point.
Specifically about the process.
Yeah.
Processing the animal.
Yeah. Yeah. We're going to see.
This is more messy, right? Than this is burned.
I
Maybe
think
one,
so.
one.
I mean, they're more involved. They have to gather the ashes. So for more normal korbanot, you don't have to gather you do, but you do it with
Shuffle at the end of the day.
I don't know. It's a good point. I will say we will see later that part of the impurity also has to do. There is another aspect though about how it's used at least. Okay.
Could it be
That may cause them to become impure.
Could it be because the scapegoat is taking on the sins, or that no?
So that's with the scapegoat. So we're not doing the scapegoat here. We're going to see. Actually, it's very important. We have to see what we're using this stuff for, because it actually explains how to make it before it discusses what it's used for. It sort of alludes to it. We saw in verse 10, but we need to move on to verse 11 and onward to see how it's used. To also see, it may not just be, so Tumah here, I'm claiming Tumah is not, the normal understanding of ritual impurity is it's a metaphysical thing that we don't understand, okay? I'm trying to make the argument that it is something we could maybe understand, and the first argument was maybe it's because you're actually physically dirty, but I'm going to actually make an argument it's not necessarily about physical dirt, as we see Tumah applied, the ritual impurity applied later in its. So let's keep going, unless there's other questions or comments. Okay. Verse 11, Yud Aleph. So here's the application. Someone who touches a corpse, a dead person, becomes ritually impure for 7 days. Line 12. Hu yitchateh vo bayom hashlishi v'yom hashvi yitar, v'im lo yitchateh v'yom hashlishi v'yom hashvi lo yitar. So he has to be sprinkled on the third day and the seventh day after touching the corpse. And if he's not sprinkled, then he or she doesn't become pure. Yud Gimel, 13. Kol hanogeh b'met b'nefesh adam asher yamut v'lo yitchateh et mishkan Adonai timei v'nichotah nefeshim Yisrael ki mei midaz lo zarak alav tamei yah o tumat vo. Okay. So if someone had touched the corpse and then didn't get sprinkled, it's bad news for them. Okay, I didn't translate that literally. Okay, so let's pause for a moment. Let's pause for a moment. You guys ever touched a corpse before?
Yeah.
Yes. What kind of experience was that?
Smelly.
Smelly?
And it was part of the learning process.
I understand. Okay, I guess what I'm alluding to is, I think the experience of touching a corpse can, I'm not saying it's like a negative experience or bad experience, but it's
Not neutral. Certainly
not neutral, meaning, how do I explain it? I want to say a negative experience. It's a negative experience. It's certainly,
There's a life.
It's-
It's a body that once was living and breathing, which is now no longer.
right, it's sort of also ick, it's sort of an ick feeling. It's sort of, you also, whenever you see, I think this is, I'm no psychologist. Is anybody a psychologist here? Are you guys psychologists? Maybe you have better terms for these things. But, when you see, someone who's hurt or someone who's dying or dead, as the extreme version of that, there's some level of projection and there's some revulsion that, that could be or will be you someday. So I'm going to say it's a negative experience. I don't want to say that means like it's bad, because we're going to see the next part is sort of a lesser version of it, which I'm also going to call a negative experience, but just what I mean, that's what I mean. I guess going through it, if you go through it. So anyway, that's my argument here. That's what the tumah is here. That's the ritual impurity, is a result of that negative experience. So then why are we sprinkled on the third and seventh day? Maybe I'm not going to answer that question. Let's move on and go to the next case, and maybe we'll come back. There's something special about the third and seventh day. Okay, 14, which I apparently cut the 1 off. Okay. Zot Torah Adam ki yamut ba'oel. Kol ha'ba'al ha'oel v'chil asher ba'oel yitma shivat yamin. This is the rule, or this is the rules for someone who dies in a tent. Anyone who comes into the tent becomes also ritually impure for 7 days. 15. And any vessel that's open, that isn't sealed, that hasn't tied with a seal on it, also becomes ritually impure. Okay, so let's back up. Who is in the tent with the person who dies? If someone dies in a tent, who is probably there with them or will shortly thereafter come into the tent? Relative, spouse, maybe close friends. Okay. The Heifer Kaddish. Okay, yeah, and the people who are involved with the corpse, of course. So what might be what might be special about 7 days then here?
Mourning.
Yeah, it sounds like Shiva, right? So this sounds like a process, like you've gone through an experience which is a negative experience. Again, I'm not saying it's like, it's a negative experience, and it takes 7 days to get to move on to the next, the next stage. And the question is, what's important about the third day? Right? So we'll come back to this, the third day, but it seems like you need to be sprinkled on the third day and the seventh day, and the third day might be significant in the process, and the seventh day might be significant in the process. Here's something I wanted to mention, although we don't talk about this because of the way that modern medicine works as well. What happens to the stuff that's in the room? Okay. What happens to the bed that someone dies on? Is that a bed that people like to reuse? So in our day and age, people a lot of times die in hospitals, right? So what normally happens, right, it gets laundered, sterilized, there's a whole process, but their process seems to be a cleansing process as well. I will say, so I'll put it this way. What's the analogy that, a lot of this is coming from my Rebbe when I learned with him. Maybe I should mention his name. His name is Rebbe Lishan Shalovitz. I think the analogy is like this. You wouldn't want to drink from a bedpan even if it's been sterilized.
Yeah, right.
Right? So it's been sterilized, it's been cleaned, why not? Okay? But there's some association with it, And again, I'm not a psychologist, but, only someone can empathize with that feeling, So basically what happens in this case is they don't want to reuse the stuff that's around the corpse, the dead person, until it's been also gone through some purification. And this is their version of that. Okay, Tet Zayin. So now this gets extended. Anybody who touches a field that has a corpse in it, who's been killed through battle, through sword, or just any other corpse, or even a human bone, or now it's been extended to graves. So if you go to the cemetery now, you're also impure for 7 days. Yud Zayin 17. Now we see how the process works exactly, and this I think applies to all of the above. They take that ash that they had made, and they mix it with mayim chayim, fresh water, spring water, whatever, cleansing water is. Chayim is alive, living water. Interesting, right, as opposed to dead, I guess. Yudchat 18. So they took the ezov, which is the what do we say? That's the hyssop? Yes, the hyssop, which by the way they also had been burned in it. So, seems very significant. And they would dip that in the water. Ish tahor. So this is very, very important. So a pure person has to do this process. A pure person has to come on the 3rd day and the 7th day is the implication. And they sprinkle this purifying water that's been mixed with this living water that's been mixed with the ash mixture. And they sprinkle it on all the people that were there, all the vessels, anybody who touched a bone, or a corpse, or even a grave. Yud Tet, 19. Sorry, I skipped ahead, but the pure person has to sprinkle on the impure people on the 3rd and the 7th day. So on the 7th day, they sprinkle a person on the 7th day, then they wash their clothes on the 7th day, and then they're pure that night. Interesting, I didn't mention, right? In Shiva, you're also not supposed to take a shower until afterwards. So I guess this is right before the end. Maybe this is reminiscent of the getting up in the morning. Okay. In any case, Kaf, 20. Okay, basically it's really bad if you don't do this. If you have this experience and you try and ignore it and you don't get purified, or at least you don't do it the way that we do it, and that may have to do with one of the sources in the first page, which, okay. So the key here that I want to add here is that the pure person has to come in. So someone has to come in on the 3rd day. They're not just being sprinkled. Someone from the outside has to come in, who's pure, who hasn't had an experience with a corpse or even with graves, on the 3rd and 7th day and sprinkle them. So that may be significant. I would argue, perhaps, that's part of the transition. Now I'm claiming this Tumah, the ritual impurity, they're arguing is a result of this negative experience with the dead in the different forms that we saw, and that we're trying to transition back into normal life, which you can sort of see as the whole process of mourning. And part of that is someone who's coming from the outside, coming to sprinkle you. On the 7th day, we're familiar with the 3rd day. We're going to see if there's any corollary, but it might be the beginning of the process.
Well, you're saying it's almost like a shiva visit. Somebody.
Yeah, right. Because otherwise,
the outsider to interact with you.
Otherwise, and also in their context, people may have been trying to stay pure, so people may not have wanted to come. We're so used to everyone goes for Shiva, but people may not have wanted to come. So this might be the one person who does come on the 3rd and 7th day. Yeah.
Another, just,
Besides family and friends, the immediate people.
The thing that's sort of just striking just from these psukim with that comparison of mine is that Shiva, mourning in general associates the relationship that generates the obligation to mourn. Here it's the physical encounter with the physical remains of the deceased that generate the obligation. So it's sort of goes in different directions.
Right. No. So right.
Maybe arguing they're really the same or they're similar.
Right, and I would say they're connected. I don't know if they're the same, but right. There's also the fact that you knew this person. Right. Here are the two. You can become ritually impure just by popping up on a corpse, and you have no idea who that is.
Right.
And that is. I'm not saying that that's the same experience as a parent passing away, because obviously you've lived your whole life with them, but it may be related, and we're going to see there may be. Corollaries to the case where you don't know who it is, even in modern practice. Even though we don't use the red heifer anymore, okay, because we're not big heifer people anyway.
We can't find one that's completely.
Right. So that's the reason, but that's the reason given. But in addition, I don't think using that type of cleanser, that type of purification ritual doesn't make sense to us either. It doesn't make sense to me, but I don't think it makes sense in modern context. So we have sort of modern corollaries. Okay, how much time do I have?
It's now 8:30. There's a clock you can see in the back wall.
Oh, that's good.
See it?
All right. Okay, so let's look at. So we'll try and take questions or comments otherwise before we move on. Yeah.
My cleaning woman
Yes?
has a full-time job as a homemaker. She works for an agency. And one of her clients, when she came home from the hospital, she needed somebody with her 24 hours a day. So she was paid by the power of attorney to stay overnight. And then her niece also stayed some of the days. Anyhow, the woman died at 2:30 in the morning while my cleaning woman was there. So it was a pretty frightening experience for her.
Oh, okay. Which also, you know what this reminds me of? Although not practiced, there is on the books, and I didn't mention this in here, there is a rule that, in theory, if you're present when someone passes away, you're supposed to also tear, even if they're not your relatives. Mm-hmm. So there is such a rule in the books. I'm not sure if people do that. Do people do that?
I don't know. I think people don't have these elaborate. Good deaths surrounded by people. It's much more, that's much more clinical now. So it's not like you have people present they would tear. I don't know. But in theory, I think it would be done. I've never heard of it being done.
Right.
We've ritualized Kriya as well. We sort of do it at the funeral stage. It's like a kind of identify moments when it's done in a ritual way rather than.
Right. Okay. Yes. So It's a good question why that happened. A lot of things become ritualized after, especially. It's whatever. It also may have to do with. Yeah. Okay. I'm not going to make. I don't know. I'm not going to speak to that.
In Korea, if someone dies in your presence.
I'm sure. No, I think from what I remember, you should, but I just don't think.
Right. On the books, that's what the rules say, but I don't know if people really do that. Right. We've also
If you've done it once, do you do it again?
I don't think so. I think we've sort of taken all the. If you're a mourner, if you're a father, mother, sister, son, daughter, you would do it at only once at the funeral or at burial, just once. But if you're a passive future, if you're a doctor, if you're a friend, if you're a neighbor, and you're there in the room, you feel you would check Kriya. I just don't think that's.
Okay. Although I'm not. This was actually not. This class wasn't about that. There is something. I do remember something about that. It is a different experience for. If you're in pain and mourning to physically tear, because you're just as an emotional outburst versus, I think that what we've moved to is a model of you are a passive acceptor of what's going on and someone else tears for you. That's how it's also become ritualized because the rabbi or whoever, basically starts it for you. And it's they do it, but it's a more like passive process.
Because we have shirts that are harder to tear, I think.
It's also true. Okay. Okay. Here's a description of the temple. I should make a note that the source here is Masechet Smachot. Masechet Smachot, which is actually written well after the temple's been destroyed. The second temple's been destroyed. It's written by a period of the Amoritic period, which is somewhere 250, 350 to 500, 600, 700. So I think it represents like an Israeli tradition, not a Babylonian tradition. It also mirrors a Mishnah, which is written earlier. The Mishnah was written 0 to 250, the Common Era. And so it's sort of taking their language and adding some things and superimposing how they envisioned it was like. So this is probably not what actually happened in the temple, but what they're envisioning did. But it's very telling what they envisioned happened in the temple well after it, generations later. Okay, B'yom HaRishon, B'yom HaSheni, and we're going to see also that they have a model of shuls, which is in the next source, which is also from Masechet Smachot. Smachot, by the way, means, you guys know what smachot means? Simcha, smachas. You heard that before? Means, what? Happiness, right? This is a euphemism. It's the tractate of happy things, but it's actually a discussion about mourning. Okay, it's a euphemism. B'yom Rishon v'yom HaSheni ein nichnas la'Har Beit. So the first day and the second day, the person does not come to Har Beit. We're going to see who the person is they're talking about. V'shlishi nichnasu mekif derech smol. So the third day they come. And we're going to see this is referring to a mourner, but it may include other people. The third day, they come, but they go to the left. Because normally they would go around the Temple Mount to the right, but they went the opposite direction. Ve'elohim shebakifim derech smol, and here some other people will go to the left. Avel, a mourner, nudeh, someone who's been excommunicated, mishi yeshlo chol, someone who's sick, umusha avdolah avadeh, and someone who's lost an object, presumably expensive enough that they really want to go to the temple and make a big deal about it. Malacha makif smol, so they would ask the person who's going to the left why they went to the left, because that's the unusual direction, and I guess it could be any one of these people. Shani avel, so in this case the mourner would say, I'm a mourner. Omrim lo ashochen b'bayit hazeh yinachmecha. The people at the Temple Mount would say, the one who dwells in this house, in the Temple Mount, in the temple, should comfort you. This is the precursor for Makom Yenachem Etchem, I guess. Mish yesh lo chole omrim lo shochem bayad hazeh yirachem alav, and then they have something they say for all these people. I just included here the one for the sick person, which is the one who dwells in this house, have mercy on you. But they have a line for everyone. So basically, what's the point here? The point is there is something special, at least in their minds, about what happens on the third day, which is that's the first day that the person leaves home. Which is not how we do it now, because they don't leave home until after that, but unless it's Shabbos, okay. But the third day, at least in their mind in the temple, was when the first time you would leave home, the first time there would be some public recognition of your mourning. Okay, so it was a step in the process. We're going to see some other corollaries of the third day. Okay, so what does it look like in the shul according to according to this source later in Masechet Smachot? So the first week, which for us is Shiva, mourner does not come to shul. The second week they come, but they don't sit in their assigned spot. The spot they normally sit in. So the third week they come and they sit in their spot, but they don't speak, whatever that means. Okay, they don't speak to people, they don't speak normally, I don't know. Revi'it shavel lechol adam. The fourth week, which is, I guess, before Shloshim, but close to Shloshim, our Shloshim, they're normal. They don't have any restrictions on where they sit or how they speak with people in shul. Okay, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Barishona Bishniya, in the first 2 weeks, they don't come to shul. Acharim ba'im etzlom nachmem ato, meaning only people go to his house. They don't leave home for 2 weeks. Shniya hi karishona. The second week's like the first one. Shlishi hik shniya. The third one, he's lining up to the initial position. He's saying the third week is the week that you come to shul and change your spot. Revi'it hi shlishit. The fourth week is the one you come and sit in your spot but not speak. Chamishit shavel lechol adam. So you have to wait till the fifth. That's not, in a sense, not the end of it's more like what we do, because that's after Shloshim is the fifth week. Okay, Rabbi Meir says, he says the first 2 weeks you don't come to shul. The third week you come, so he doesn't have this idea of you changing spots. He says the third week you come to shul, sit in your spot, but don't talk to people. The fourth week you're like everyone else. So basically his model is at the beginning it takes more time at the beginning but less time at the end. V'med dvarim orim b'beit HaKnesset aval b'beit HaMidrash ola afilo b'shavat rishona. Okay, that point is not important for this discussion, I think. But you can be, but the Beit Midrash, the Beit Midrash is different. But shul, maybe because it's ritualized, I don't know. But the point is, it's clear from this. We didn't see 3 days here, but we saw the first week. We see that it's a process. It's a month-long process, at least, maybe. Some people even more. Before you're sort of transitioning back into normal life, at least normal shul life, in your normal spot, speaking normally with people. Questions about this source? All right.
Would you ask like why we sprinkle the mourner on the third day?
Oh, so yeah, go ahead.
Could it be because the first 3 days of Shiva are more intense?
Right, and we're going to see that some of the rules that are more that's the next part as well, talking a little bit about what's more intense about the first 3 days. But the point, I guess the point from my point is that the first 3 days are more intense because they're more intense. You're closer to what happened.
Right.
It takes time basically, and how much time it seems to be a little bit debated. Here, and for different amounts of time for different things. We're going to see, but yeah, at the beginning it's much more intense because they just passed away, and the third day and the seventh day are just points in the process from the biblical model of a transition. And these are other points, other markers, first week, second week, third week, fourth week. We mark it with Shiva and Shloshim, but there may have been even more fine delineations of transition, according to this source. All right, speaking of which, the next source, which is in the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud, Moed Katan, which, speaking about Chol Hamoed, actually has a whole section about mourning during Chol Hamoed, and that's where this whole discussion really comes up. And it's a long discussion there, but I grabbed one quote here that's relevant. Tanu Rabbanan, which is a Breita, so it's quoting earlier materials, source material from 0 to 250, probably around the same time as the Mishnah. Aval Shosha Yamim Arishonim Asur B'Shelat Shalom. The first 3 days, the mourner is prohibited from saying hello, Shelat Shalom, greeting people how they would greet people. They would say, I guess, Shalom or Ma Shalomcha, or basically some way of a normal greeting people. They could not do in the first 3 days. Yishosha B'ad Shiva, from the third to seventh day, Meshiva Eino Shoel. They can respond if someone asks them how they're doing, or basically how they're doing. But they shouldn't ask people. The mourner doesn't ask other people how they're doing, but if someone asks them, they can respond. From the seventh day on, they can speak normally. They can ask how you're doing. People can ask how they're doing. Although I think the practical halacha actually depends on who you're mourning for, whether that's actually the case. Although going back to the next source, Masechet Ketano, which is similar. Actually a little bit later, right? This is the source we saw from the same time period we saw before, before the source before. Shelu b'shalamom armena avalani. So meaning during the first 3 days, if someone, b'yom harishon u'b'yom hashni omer lehem avalani b'shosha mishim b'sava rafa v'hu eino shoel. So basically they're explaining what this means a little bit. They said on the first and second day, if someone asks the mourner, not you, if how they're doing, or greets them asks them how they're doing, they say what they meant, or at least what they claim it meant when they said you don't respond, is you say to them, I'm a mourner, meaning you're not supposed to be asking me. From the third day on, you can respond, sort of like a little bit stricter than what they said. When they're saying the response shouldn't be a normal response. You should respond, but in a weak tongue, in a weak lip, meaning you just respond quietly. So, what's to get from these sources? I think the takeaway here is that, first of all, the third day is a delineating mark here, and it has to do with how the mourner interacts with other people. And I think this whole thing about, right, and it's very reminiscent of what happened in the Torah, because it's really no one's coming to visit you until the third day, so you don't really talk to anybody. And then they come back on the seventh day, and then you go back. Then you're transitioned back into society, right? People don't ask you how you're doing. The assumption is you're not doing well. But you don't converse with people normally. This is really how it goes at a show. I mean,
the visitor on the third day is just he's not staying. He's just popping in, doing his sprinkling, and then he goes. So
right.
It's not like a full interaction.
Right, for sure. Right, as opposed to seventh day, it is not a full interaction. But then that night,
then you go. Exactly.
Then you go.
It's the beginning of the
Right.
into the next stage of
Yeah. I actually like Shivas. I don't like Shivas. I find that Shivas, of the ritualized Jewish things, I find them to be very genuine, in a way. And part of that comes from this. This is just my personal feelings,
You're not talking.
Right. Certain rituals I feel like are very just like ritual, and it's like, but Shivas are very genuine in a sense because, and part of that has to do with, it's very hard to interact, social, the normal way you talk with people is not the way that you should talk with a mourner, and this is sort of comes out in the rules here too.
You have a question?
Yeah, I just wonder, are there certain topics that you should avoid when someone is sitting Shiva?
So, I just as practical, contemporary, is you're not supposed to address them or ask them how they're doing, and so you just really let the mourner, and you should sit silently, and you walk in traditional Shiva as a paying condolence, but you don't say anything. Maybe you can say, I think you could say to the mourner, tell me about your father, tell me about your mother.
Right.
But you don't say how you do, you don't, people out, and really just listen to them, and they're supposed to speak as much or as little as they wish, and the person offering condolences should say very little until, the Hukim, maybe you become like those in one's eye in Jerusalem.
I was asked by a good friend of my mother what my plans were that I was doing in Chicago. Was that an appropriate question, or was that just because she was trying to be genuine?
Wait, say it again. She asked you, you asked
me.
She asked you. So the point also here, when you let them talk, they drive how, if they need, what they need. Because every mourning situation is very different. Some people have different relationships with whoever they're mourning for. People, it's very different when someone loses someone, tragically and unexpectedly versus, So when you let them talk, it's sort of giving them the reins to see at what point they really need to transition. So if they're asking you about your stuff, I don't think that you're allowed to respond to them, but that's because you're letting them drive. But that's not what a conversation you bring up with them.
Correct.
Because if they're not ready to leave their bubble,
So
you're not pulling them out of their bubble.
I was sitting Shiva for my aunt last week.
I'm so sorry.
Oh, you were sitting Shiva.
For my aunt.
Uh-huh.
And my mom's close friend of 30-some years asked me, so what are your plans going to be in Chicago?
So if they ask you,
And I blew up at her. I was pissed. I'm sorry. It was like,
the rules for the mourner, sorry, I misunderstood. The rules for the mourner are much less defined because basically the general rule is just you're lenient with mourners because mourners do whatever,
Yeah, but she shouldn't have been asked. You shouldn't have been asked.
They shouldn't have asked you,
I was
basically.
saying she should have had enough sensitivity
Say
and
nothing.
awareness
Right.
to say,
Nothing.
I when Shiva, you're present. You're just present with your feelings.
Exactly.
Right.
It's so hard for people to be silent, and that's the wisdom of whatever. We've talked about this for a long time. It's not.
I'll talk to you after the discussion.
No, so, okay.
It's interesting though, because so the first 3 days, the mourner doesn't greet other people,
Correct.
but at Shiva, that's the person who's supposed to initiate conversation.
Right, but usually it's very, and I like this, not like this, I find this to be, an indicator that a good way to delineate that this is a different space than normal space, and this is a different social interaction than normal situation, is that instead of saying hi, instead of saying how are you, it's the wave, the nod, and sit down and get to it. That's how I think in traditional Shivas. Look, every Shiva is different, and every person's different, and every, it has a lot to do with there's a lot of factors involved. But when I find that to be genuine, I guess, I like that in that sense. Not that I like Shivas.
This is specifically Shiva Shalom.
Yeah, right,
Greetings,
right.
as opposed to what you're saying.
Yeah, asking them how they're doing.
Skipping the small talk as it were.
Yeah.
Getting straight to whatever the
Right.
mourner wants to talk about.
Basically.
If they want.
Right.
But the law here is on the mourner, not the respondent, not on.
Yeah, because then the question is, right, you're right. So basically, if they ask you, right, then in theory, you just tell them, I'm a mourner,
Right, that serves as a reminder to the
right.
person
So
asking.
maybe the rule is on you. I'm not trying to criticize you for what you do, but then it's just, either change the topic or tell them maybe we should be talking about that. Meaning you can be more abrupt in the first 3 days because it should be more obvious to people in the first 3 days, I think. And after that, it's like you say, whatever, and then change the topic. Right. Good point. All right, so this next source I'm not going to talk about a lot. Let's see, what's with the time? I want to get to the later sources. This also just, whatever, I'll do it very quickly. This also, quote from the Babylonian Talmud, there, a little bit later. Yeah, a little bit later. Okay, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav. Rabbi Yehuda is quoting the name Rav, who's the first generation Babylonian rabbi, very famous, one of Rebbe's students, so Rebbe codified the Mishnah at 250, so he's talking, we're a generation later, 300, give or take. So this is a very difficult statement, but he says anyone who becomes mourns too excessively for the person they're mourning for is going to end up having to cry for another person. So that's a pretty harsh statement, but here's the point. Ha-ketzad, and I skipped a little bit, but ha-ketzad, what do you mean? Shlosha yamim lavachi, so the first 3 days crying, v'shiva, and the 7 days lehasped for eulogies, u'shloshim legeutz v'tzvot, and the first 30 days restrictions on haircuts and laundering, which I'm not getting into here, but or at least dry cleaning. You shouldn't be more merciful than me. God says, don't be more merciful than me. Don't mourn more than I've dictated. There are rules, by the way, that apply especially for people who are mourning parents past the first 30 days, but the point here is it's supposed to be a transition. It's supposed to be a transition. The part of the transition, just to remember, is that, we are trying to validate people's experience and everything they're going through, but the ultimate goal is to get them back, not to stay in a depressive state and to come back, to transition back into society and to, be normal functioning people at some point. How long that takes, what the steps are, okay, we can talk about, but that's what the point is here.
What's the source of Hashem saying, don't be more merciful than I am?
You mean, why can't we?
Yeah, why?
How is 30 days?
What is it about 30 days that Hashem is saying,
Right.
don't be more merciful than I am?
Right, so the time,
Where does that come from?
where does the 30 days from? So initially, I didn't bring any sources to that, but I mean, there is discussion about Yaakov, right? When Yaakov, no, Moshe was mourned for 30 days. Yes? Yaakov, he was mummified, and then they did do, maybe there was also 30, I gotta look it back up. I don't remember. There is some biblical sources about 30 days. I think so. Or maybe it was Aaron or both.
Aaron also?
Maybe Aaron also. But it just sort of makes sense. It's like a month, So it makes sense that that's a demarcation, give or take a month. So, but you see, we saw that the one source where the number of weeks, how much each rabbi thought you needed for each step might be a little bit different. Which is true, and it still sums out. Things do get sort of like formalized, but things like getting up on the seventh day speak to that, and there are ways to change the timetables a little bit for people who need more or less. Not a lot, but okay. Here we go. Let's look at some later sources, medieval sources. So the next source is we're talking. So the question is, what does the water purification come up again in later sources, or now that we don't do the red heifer, it just doesn't exist. So the Beit Yosef is 16th century. He was born in Spain, but he fled when he was a child, very young. He lived in Sfat most of his life. He did carry the Spanish tradition. He quotes here his rabbi, I think one of his, I don't know if he learned with him, but one of the main Catalonian rabbis, Mari Abuab, of the generation before him, but he's the author of the Shulchan Aruch and main codifier of halacha that we look to. Okay. Rabbeinu Agdol Mari Abuhav Zal Katva B'Simen Zeh B'Shem Orach Chaim. So he quotes the name of Orach Chaim, who is actually Ashkenazi, Provence, southern France, in the early 14th, late 13th century. Okay. This actually discussion comes up on when you have to wash your hands. They're talking about washing after going to the bathroom in the morning, whatever it is. So one of the things they add to the list is Misha Nagaba Meit. So if you touch a corpse, you have to wash your hands. So they have a whole list. I didn't bring it all. But anybody who doesn't wash their hands after these things, including going to the bathroom, and here including touching a corpse, right, what's the penalty? The penalty, in quotes, is someone whose wives will lose their wisdom, and someone who's adkan lishno. That's the language of the Orach Chaim. It's quoted by the Mari Abuha. But if they're not a wise person, they're going to go crazy. Or yotemi dato, what it means, not exactly clear, but it's bad. The Eliyahu Rabbah, who's a much later source in what century? 18th, late 17th, early 18th century. So a little while later, sort of reads it or rereads it. He didn't mean really go crazy. They'll be a sinner. Because they sort of have the spirit of foolishness. So if they ignore that experience, or it doesn't mean anything to them, that's not good. That means something's not good about that person, then they'll come to sin. Not that they'll be crazy. Okay, what it means. Okay, so that's with a corpse. If someone actually literally touched a corpse. So the Mordechai, who is also Ashkenazi, same, but now in Germany. So the Provence group was a little bit different, but this is all sort of in the same. It's very interesting how these ideas sort of cross borders where often there are delineations in customs and laws. But here now in Germany, in the 13th century here, he says, the Mordechai says, he gives another list of 10 people who need to wash their hands. So now, someone who walks amongst the dead, which likely is a reference to cemeteries and graves. And the Beit here, who is also 13th century Germany, I'm looking at the footnotes, because I usually have to remind myself every time. He was the student of the Maharam. He also gives a list. So now he extends it, not only so it gets extended originally from just touching a corpse to also someone who's in a cemetery, and now someone who goes to the mourner's house. So he says, if you go to a shiva, you have to wash your hands afterwards. Have you guys been to a cemetery where they have a washing station afterwards? So this is familiar to you, this idea, but it even gets extended to maybe to the house of mourning, because even if you're going into that atmosphere and you have that, even having an experience with the mourner can bring up those feelings to some extent. To the extent, at least they're willing to. Oh, so something I forgot to mention, which so there may be a bridge between this. I guess the earliest source I quoted here was 13th century. There probably is a bridge between the red heifer and the 13th century. It seems, and I don't remember, I never looked at this inside, but I heard from a rabbi that I think they have some archaeological evidence also that outside cemetery, in ancient Israel, like around the time of the Mishnah, probably 0 to 250-ish, they have some archaeological evidence that there were mikvahs outside of cemeteries as well. So they may have like dunked on the way out of a cemetery as well. So the idea of having to purify yourself after some experience with death or a corpse is pops up again, even though we don't use the red heifer. Questions, comments? Interesting? Yes?
Maybe the rabbi can answer. Are you supposed to wash your hands if you just visit a cemetery?
That's basically what they're saying, and that's been the
I
custom.
don't mean for funeral, but just...
Yeah, because right, when you go to visit a cemetery, right, you have, to some extent, you have that experience. I see my time is running short.
That's the connection. That's definitely the connection to the. It's not about being a mourner. It's about the tumah. It's about the context, the presence of death. That generates.
Right. That's the point. That's what my point is. Meaning this. Right. That there is content behind that ritual impurity. It's not just some metaphysical thing. And one indication that it's not metaphysical is we have similar stuff. That in reaction to similar types of experiences later on in life, later on in history, Jewish halachic history. Okay, so the next two sources I may talk about a little bit more next week, although next week's class is separate also, so you don't have to have come to this one to do that. But basically there is a discussion, I wonder if I should just look at this inside next week because I see I'm at the end of my time. So there's a discussion here about The first two sources I'm actually not going to look at right now. But the second two, the ones I have English for here, there's a discussion about, in the Mishnah, and actually an interaction between Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and the Tzdukim, the Sadducees, about what actually conveys tumah, conveys ritual impurity, and whether the first source is talking about the animal bones, right? So bones, we know, convey ritual impurity. But what if it's an animal bone, right? Well, I guess sometimes we eat animal bones, maybe, or we eat off of animal bones. So that generally not. And then there's a discussion about about non-Jews, and are they more on the side of, do we see them more as human or as animal? Maybe I'll leave this a cliffhanger. Also, although I will, maybe I'll read the last source. Let's look at the last source. It's taught in a Breita. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, I'm just looking at it, say that the graves of Gentiles do not render one impure, as is stated. And you, my sheep, the sheep of my pasture are man. That's Ezekiel. I.e., the Jewish people are called man, but Gentiles are not called man. So it's a very extreme statement in Bava Metzia. But I will point out, it says the graves. So actual non-Jewish corpses do convey tumah. Even though he said it, they're not human. I think the implication is they do. So if you're saying that graves you have this experience with graves, but it's not the same. There is some recognition it's not necessarily the same experience exactly. And to the extent that if they're Gentiles, well, we can write it off, that it's just a non-Jewish grave. You drive by and it's just a non-Jewish. I don't want to say disparaging things about non-Jews, because non-Jews can be great. I heard a nice Torah about that last week. But okay, I want to come back to this topic next week. But yes.
If you're saying that it's the emotional response,
Yeah.
the emotional connection to death, it shouldn't matter whether that grave is a grave of a Jew or
Yeah, well, I mean, it depends on how you relate to them. Do you relate to, I'll put it this way, do you relate to the non-Jews as the animals, wow, this is really politically charged, I didn't really want to do this, but, the terrorists who are just trying to kill us and they're animals and they have no, you've heard some of this rhetoric before, and they have no morals. Have you heard any of this rhetoric?
Yeah.
Where basically people dehumanize humans?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so to the extent that you relate to a non-Jew in that way, then you may have a less significant negative experience when you encounter at least their graves, in this case. To the point where they're our neighbors and they help me, and they're good people, and I would never, the Provençal rabbis would never say anything. They're the ones who are, the Meiri in Provence, southern France, they seem to have good relationships with the non-Jews. They weren't, I don't think they were dealing with the Crusades in the same way. He made the argument, for instance, non-Jews, Christianity is not avodah zarah, it's not idol worship. In any case, that's a much bigger topic that I didn't want to jump into. But the point is, the point I wanted to draw from these sources is, it was clear from these, and the one before as well, that it has to do with the experience. Meaning it's not some metaphysical thing that has nothing to do, if you're willing to make these types of delineations, that was the whole argument. Okay, so let me summarize. My argument is, since I am over time, I apologize, is that this chok, right, I would, if you want to make an argument the chok, the rules that, it may not be evident to what the moral or the reason is for these things, but if you look at them in their context and you look at sort of corollaries through halachic history, you can see that they actually are responding to human needs, human experiences at least, and that that's a way we see that instead of using the heifer, where we do see it was used as a cleansing or separation or transition from an experience with death, and we find a lot of corollaries as it relates to social interactions, coming back to synagogue, which is also social reactions, haircuts, and I can't remember my hand washing, and etc. Questions, comments?
Wow. What's next week? What's your, what?
Next week, oh, that's a good question. Next week, I think we are talking about the Kohen and the Nazir. We're going to discuss whether they're antiquated, totally irrelevant, or if they're models of piety for today, and for us, and for people in society today. I think based on this class, you'll see where I'm going to make the arguments.
Awesome. Awesome.
Thank you.
Things that are often written off, and that's irrelevant, antiquated, not relevant to me. We'll see how we can use it, how it's relevant for us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.